So I hate that I'm saying this, but a couple days ago, we got news that Naughty Dog, the creators behind the acclaimed The Last of Us series, has been working on The Last of Us Factions, a multiplayer game, for the last couple years, and they just canceled it. Let's talk about it. What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. That guy right here, and thank you so much for another daily discussion video. This time I want to talk about Naughty Dog, the creators behind The Last of Us, their Last of Us Online game, and the fact that it was recently canceled. Now, this is news that's been around, I think, for a couple days now. I think this news dropped last week, and I didn't make a video about it because I felt like I didn't even know. I feel like I've been spending the last couple days processing this information, digesting it, trying to make sense of it all, because there's a long story behind this, years of development, years of progress and pushback from the developers and Sony and new kind of consultants coming in and talking about the future of live service at Sony. And there's so much that goes into this that I felt like a longer video was definitely warranted. But I want to start off this video talking about this article that Naughty Dog dropped back on December 14th that really explains the situation, I think, as succinctly as it possibly can be. So it states that we realize many of you have been anticipating news about the project that we've been calling The Last of Us Online. There's no easy way to say this. We've made the difficult decision to stop development on that game. We know the news will be tough for many, especially our dedicated Last of Us Factions community who have been following our multiplayer ambitions ardently. We're equally crushed at the studio as we were looking forward to putting it in your hands, and we wanted to share with you some background on how we came to that decision. The multiplayer team has been in pre-production with this game since we were working on The Last of Us Part 2, crafting an experience we felt was unique and had tremendous potential. As the multiplayer team iterated on their concepts for The Last of Us Online during this time, their vision crystallized and the gameplay got more refined and satisfying, and we were all enthusiastic about the direction in which we were headed. In ramping up to full production, the massive scope of our ambition became clear. To release and support The Last of Us Online, we'd have to put our studio resources, all of our studio resources, behind supporting post-launch content for years to come, severely impacting development on future single-player games, which, as we know, is their bread and butter. I mean, Naughty Dog is known for single-player experiences, so they have a point there. So we had two paths in front of us: become a solely live service game studio or continue to focus on single player narrative games that have defined Naughty Dog's heritage. We are immensely proud of everyone at the studio that touched this project. The learnings and investments in technology from this game will carry into how we develop our projects and will be invaluable in the direction we are headed as a studio. We have more than one ambition, brand new single game that we're working on here at Naughty Dog, and we cannot wait to share more about what comes next when we're ready. Until then, we're incredibly thankful to our community for your support throughout the years. And that's the article. I want to address the elephant in the room, right? The impact of live service. We've seen this massive giant growing within the gaming industry over the last decade or so, where games like Fortnite and Apex and Destiny and so many other games have come about that don't really have a concrete ending. In fact, many games are releasing more and more often that are really trying to push for longevity, right? And in many ways, from a financial standpoint, it does kind of make sense. Developers spend years making these games, and they're costing more and more and more every generation of games, every couple years. These games are getting really expensive to make, right? And so in many ways, I do understand that developers do need to find a way to increase the longevity of this game, either via multiplayer or some sort of other thing that they have that can extend the lifespan and more really financial compensation from that game. I believe it's why DLCs became a thing, right? It's why map packs became a thing. It was really trying to recruit the additional money that it costs to make those things. Now, obviously, it's to get people to continue playing them, but I think in many ways, it's really an opportunity for them to not only increase the lifespan and longevity of the game, but really to continue to cash in on that game. Now, in many ways, this has been abused over and over again, right? We've seen this time and time again where, game studios have, created map packs that included old maps, Call of Duty, We've seen this time and time again where games clearly, have not felt like they were finished, and that the DLCs really were just putting stuff out into the world that already should have been in the main game. Now, I think gamers, us as gamers, we can typically tell when this is the case. We can tell when a game has come out and it's felt unfinished and it's felt undone, and then a DLC comes around and you play it and you feel like, huh, I feel like this kind of should have been in the main game. So we've seen this time and time again. My point being, I understand why DLCs are a thing. I understand that they need to make money. And, when it comes to single player games, I know that there's not as much value in them in this constantly evolving multiplayer landscape that games seem to find themselves in. So, and that way I do understand it. But in this case, with this article, it does make me a little sad. It makes me sad because I know that over the last couple of years, I mean, this is talking about since The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2, I think it's only a few years old. I think it's like four years old at this point. And obviously we know a remaster is coming. But ever since The Last of Us Part 2, I think news started to circulate around that they were making The Last of Us Online. And then a couple years later, we got, concrete news that The Last of Us Factions was the name of that multiplayer game, and that was in development. Naughty Dog was working on it. It was in the pipeline. And there was a lot of speculation as to when that game was ever going to come out, because after that was announced, there was no talk about it. Insomniac wasn't bringing it up. It was like, okay, is this game still happening, right? We would have expected any sort of update, a trailer, something at this point, since it's been years since the game was originally announced. So, people started to worry, and obviously that worry, it became a lot of people's worst nightmare in the fact that this game inevitably got canceled. But I do want to point out this fact here. Naughty Dog had a point here. I mean, it's not often you see developers come straight out and say, hey, we're canceling this game, and this 100%, keeping it real with you, this is why. And they, I'll read it back to you. It states that in ramping up to full production, the massive scope of our ambition became clear. To release and support a Last of Us Online, we'd have to put all of our studio resources behind supporting post-launch content for years to come. What would that mean? That means that there would be no Last of Us Part 3. There would be no game that I'm really hoping for. I'm hoping that Naughty Dog makes another one at some point, Jak and Daxter. There would be no Jak and Daxter. There would be no future Uncharted games. There would be no new IPs. There would be none of that. None of that would be able to happen because the entire studio would then need to be dedicated to ensuring that new skins, new modes, new maps, new content was constantly coming out for this game. This is the downside of live service, is when a studio, when they, I guess you could say, when they invest into these live service games, that really becomes the entirety of that studio. And either you take people off of that game and put them onto new projects, but then new projects take longer to make because you still have a majority of the studio putting their time into this game, or you just end up spreading the studio too thin, and it's not good. I think live service games can be good, and I think that there's some good in them, but it seems like every studio is trying to capitalize on a live service component. And I feel like with Naughty Dog, I think they're good in their lane. I think they do their best at what they do, and what they're best at is creating incredibly engaging, real characters, real worlds, real stories in the single player format. And I think we desperately are in need of more single player games. Like I said before, I know why we don't really get them as much anymore, because a lot of game studios want to invest in games that they can kind of milk. You know what I'm saying? As much as we don't want to admit it, they want to be able to milk these games for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? And as long as they, when you make a game and then they're like, hey, we can just kind of keep just dripping this game, it's an unfortunate thing, but it's really, at the end of the day, comes down to money. So they said we had two paths in front of us: become a solely live service game studio, or continue to focus on single player narrative games that have defined Naughty Dog's heritage. And I think that while it is sad that they won't be making The Last of Us Faction, and that is an unfortunate reality that I think a lot of us are going to have to come to terms with, that this is the game that could have been, right? I think it's a good thing that they decided not to do this. An article by The Verge goes on to discuss this a little bit more in detail, and states that the studio says it's in pre-production for The Last of Us. It's been in pre-production for The Last of Us Online, even while working on The Last of Us Part 2. And, a lot of this stuff we've already kind of talked about, but It says the cancellation of The Last of Us Online adds to Sony's broader pushback of its live service ambitions. Instead of releasing 12 live service games by 2026, it now only plans to release 6. And I think that Sony really needs to dial back on their desire to want to push for all of these live service games, you know? And a lot of people assumed that their decision to buy Bungie centered around their wanting and their desire to get their hands on Destiny. But I think a lot of people failed to realize, and I made a whole video about this, that Bungie doesn't want Destiny. They want Bungie, or Sony doesn't want Bungie for Destiny. They want Bungie for their live service expertise, for Bungie to come in and potentially consult on future projects, future live service ambitions that Sony has, and to tell them whether or not they believe that it has the meat and bones to potentially go the distance. There was a whole article done about this that I think, I want to say IGN did. Okay, I found it. There was an article that came out via IGN that talks about Sony's relationship with Bungie, the reason that they bought them. And I'm not going to touch base on this too much because the point of this video really is talking about live service, Naughty Dog, their decision to cancel The Last of Us Factions, and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to point out the fact that it states that confirmation The Last of Us multiplayer game is still being worked on at Naughty Dog comes 6 months after reports emerged it had undergone setbacks at the developer. Taking advantage of the recently acquired studio Bungie's multiplayer expertise, Sony reportedly had it analyze Naughty Dog's work before it deemed what is best for the game is to give it more time. This response followed a Bloomberg report that alleged that the quality and long-term viability of The Last of Us multiplayer had come into question, with only a small group of developers continuing to work on it. Given this update arrived at least 2 years after Naughty Dog began work on the game, many believed it would never see the light of day again. And to be honest with you, they were right. This continues to elaborate on the discussion that Sony bought Bungie for their live service expertise, for their multiplayer expertise, because there's not a lot of people, not a lot of developers that can say that they've been able to, you know, have the lifespan that Bungie has been able to have with Destiny. And don't get me wrong, as a longtime Destiny player, that game has had its ups, it's had its downs. I've stepped away, I've come back, you know, it's a very tug of war kind of thing. But, you know, we can't deny that Bungie has found a way to create a successful live service game. And I think that when they looked apparently at Naughty Dog and The Last of Us multiplayer game, they said, hey, you know, it's good, but there really isn't a lot here. And Naughty Dog was faced with the decision. They could either continue on with it and hope that they could give it a little bit more. But I think as they realized what was required of a live service game like this, they realized that it wasn't worth the investment, which would be their entire studio and all of their resources would be devoted to creating and maintaining this live service experience. So that's really the decision. I think the decision of them to step away from it was a wise one. I think live service is it's a lengthy project, and once you step into that, it's gonna be really hard to step away from it, especially if it's a success. But that's all for me, guys. Let me know what you guys think about The Last of Us Factions. Were you excited about this game? How do you feel about the fact that it was inevitably canceled? If you're anything like me, I'm definitely heartbroken by it, but I think in the long term for the success of Naughty Dog as a studio, I think their decision to step away as far away from the live service game and the live service grind, as I call it, I think was the best decision for not only them, but for everyone involved. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. If you enjoy these kind of videos, dropping a like on this is greatly appreciated. It really helps out the channel. Subscribe if you're new here, all of that good YouTube stuff. As always, my name is That Guy Rye. Be sure to like and follow for more.